Hey guys, so I'm going to show you how to do migrations and Sequelize. Now I'm talking about database migrations, and you may be asking yourself, what are they or why do you need them? So let me explain. So I have an application right here that it uses a Postgres database, and this is a Node server, and I'm using the Sequelize ORM to basically have my Node.js make database queries. And if I type PSQL, I can check out my, this will allow me to basically query stuff in my Postgres database. And I'm just going to connect to my database, which is test GraphQL DB. And then I'm going to show you guys one of my tables. So select all from students. So we can see I have this table here in my database with some test scores. So these are my students. And let's say I no longer want to call these test scores, maybe they're quizzes and I want to change them. But I don't want to get rid of the data. I have two students here. I don't want to get rid of their scores. I just want to change these from test scores to quiz scores. And so what you would do is what's called a migration. So a migration is just changing the database. Now you might have seen me in past videos or have done this yourself where you just drop the database and recreate it again. And then you're able to rename these to quiz scores, or maybe I only want 2 quizzes or 2 tests. Change the data in any way. But really when you want to use migrations is when you want to keep your data and migrate it over to a new structure, a new form, if you will. So that's what I'm going to be showing you how to do, is using Sequelize. Take this and we're just going to rename these to quizzes. I want this to be quiz score 1, quiz score 2, quiz score 3, and then we're going to do a little bit of an advanced migration so I can show you some of the cooler things you can do with it. So let's get started. So like I said, we're going to be using Sequelize. Here's my little model over here. I have this up in Visual Studio Code, and here's my data model right here and my project. And as we can see, I just have test score 1, test scores 2, test scores 3, and I have my integers. So really what I want is to just change this to quiz 1 and quiz 1 through 3. So now I've changed in my data model, but this doesn't change anything. If I were to migrate, if I were to restart the server, rerun it, we would still see these values here. So I actually need to do the actual migration. Here I'm only changing the model. So this is my database model, I'm only changing it. That doesn't really affect the database, assuming we're not dropping it. So over here I'm doing, down here at the bottom, I'm doing sequelize.sync force. So this would actually drop the database, but I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that. That way we do not drop the database and we can migrate. So the first thing you want to do is get the Sequelize CLI. Now you can see I just typed the word Sequelize and I can see all the commands for Sequelize. If you don't have this, you can try typing it to see if this works for you. If you don't have it, you can install it using npm. So I can do npm i-g. Let me clear this so it's at the top. npm i-g Sequelize CLI, and then you can go ahead and install it. So then once you have that installed, you should be able to type this and it should pop out here and get all the commands. Now the first thing we want to do is actually init our project. So I'm going to do sequelize.init. And now what this will do is it'll actually go ahead and create a config/config.json file. Now I already have one here, but if you didn't, it should create it for you. It looks like it's not going to overwrite it. And so now we have this. And what this does is basically you have your username, password, your database, your host, all this stuff. So basically this is your credentials to log into your database. That way Sequelize can log in and affect it. So here's my username, password, the database, to log into this database and actually affect things. Now if you already have Sequelize set up, which I do, you'll notice how these right here match what I have in my config. So my config, I have this data, and host is localhost when you're using this locally, and the dialect is Postgres. Now you could change this to MySQL or anything else. And also if you are looking to do something in production, you can have, you see how this says development, you can have another one called production, and then change the values of that, right? or you can set these to actually just do, so this is a JSON file, but you can make a config.js file and pass in process.env.db username, so you can actually do environment variables as well, so whichever you prefer. But anyway, so this is, you want to put in your information for your local setup, and then I can come over here and I can actually, like it says, I can initialize migrations, which is what we want to do. So we can start migrating stuff. So Sequelize init migrations, and then it says successfully made a folder, and we can go ahead and clear this. Come over here, we can see we have a new folder created called migrations, and that's actually all it did. It didn't do anything else. We can see our other options. The next thing we want to do is you can do multiple migrations, right? So I might want to change it once and change it back, or do something else. So you'll actually create a new migration file every time you want to make a change. But you can make multiple changes in a single migration file, which is what we'll see. So I'm going to say Sequelize, and I'm going to go ahead and create a new migration file. So migrate. This is how you actually migrate, db migrate, but we just want to create a new migration file, which is what we're going to do right here. So migration generate, and we can give it a name. I'm going to say name is quiz, or you could say rename to quiz, you know, anything you want. I'm just going to say quiz. That's enough of a reminder to myself to know. And then we should get a file in here called -quiz, and you'll notice it also time and dates it for your own use. Then you should see something that looks like this. You have an up and a down. So here you're going to put out all your logic that you want to basically do the migration. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this comment. And then let's say you want to revert this, get rid of that. Let's say you want to revert this migration. Something went wrong. You would put the logic to revert it in the down column. So I'm going to come over here, and I want to, like I said, I want to rename my database columns. So we'll use this query interface to do this. Now if I come over here, this is the query interface. This is where you do all your migration stuff. So they have this nice documentation on Sequelize where you can see all the commands. The particular one we're going to be starting out with is rename column, which we can see is right here. We can see we want to put the table name. So for us it's going to be students. And then we basically just, oh sorry, this is remove index. We want rename column. So the table name, and then the name before and the name after. So I'm going to come back over here, and I'm just going to say query interface dot rename column, and I would like to do this on the students table, and I'm going to call this, instead of test score 1, I want to call it quiz score 1. And I want to do this 3 times. But these guys are going to be, 2, this is going to be 3. Cool. So I'm renaming 3 different tables, test score 1, 2, and 3 to quiz score 1, 2, 3. Now these are promises, and the return value of up is a promise. So what you do is you say return, and you return an array of promises, just like that. Oops. And make sure you do commas, not semicolons at the end. And cool. So now we're returning an array of promises. So what Sequelize is going to do is go ahead and run all these commands when we tell it to migrate. And what it's going to do is it's going to rename all these columns. So let's go ahead and do the down as well. So down is for reverting. So let's say something went wrong and we want to revert this. What we could do is say quiz score 1. And now we change this name to test score 1. So we're just flipping it, right? So I can delete both of those, copy, put them down here. So now if something goes wrong, and we're going to rename these of course, I can call basically undo migration, right? And what it will do is it will rename the column from quiz score to test score 1, and we'll successfully revert it back. I don't really do the down as much, but it is good practice to do this. A lot of times I will only implement up. so I don't actually end up running down really at all. But it's good in practice in case something goes wrong with your database. You can revert it back if you need to. But let's go ahead and see how you actually go ahead and run this. So again, I'm just going to go into PSQL so we can see the change before and after. Connect to my database, and then we're going to select all from students. So we see our scores right here, and I'm just opening a new tab in my terminal, and I'm going to go ahead and say Sequelize. And what we want to run is this db migrate, which just runs the pending migrations. So Sequelize db migrate. And then if we do everything correctly, which we did, we should see migrating, and then it migrated. And you can see which ones it ran and how long it took. And if I come back over here, you can go ahead and do a select, and we can see we still get test scores. So what the heck went wrong? Okay, so I figured out what was wrong with my migration right here. I need to put promise.all. So I was under the impression that you could just pass an array of promises, but it looks like the return value of this, they want it to be a promise itself. So the way you do that is you just say promise.all. And so when I do that, we can see that when I run the migration, we get the change from quiz scores, from test scores to quiz scores, and everything is working nicely now. Okay, sweet. So now I want to show you one more migration that's a little bit more advanced. So right now I have quiz score 1, quiz score 2, quiz score 3. But what if I wanted to actually change the way the data is stored? So right now I have 3 columns, but what if I just wanted like a quizzes column or a quiz column, where I just have an array of quiz scores instead of doing this? So that's what we're going to migrate this to next. So I'm going to go ahead and change the model for it first. So instead of quiz score 1, quiz score 2, and so on, we're going to have a quiz. Is it quizzes? I don't even know how to spell. We'll just say quiz. Quiz scores, we'll say. And so I'm going to say data types dot array. So this is something specific to Postgres. So if you're not using Postgres, you cannot use arrays. But you could, same principles apply when doing migrations if you want to see how I'm doing that. But we're going to use the array data type, and I'm going to say data types dot integer. Okay, so we're going to store all the quiz scores in an array of integers. And then let's go ahead and make a new migration here. So this migration is all done, so I'm going to go ahead and close it. And I'm going to come back over here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the same thing as I did before to create a new migration. Oops. Which I think it was migration generate. Yep. Sequelize migration generate name. And the name I'm going to give this is quiz scores. Okay, so we see your quiz scores here. So here's how I would go about doing this migration. So I'm going to do a promise.all again. So the first thing I would do is, and I actually don't even need to use promises. So that's the one other thing I dislike about this Sequelize migration, is I have to use this crappy .then syntax, which you're about to see me do. I'd much rather do async await, but for this, because we're using the Sequelize command line, maybe there's a way to get it, but I don't know how to. So here's what we're going to start off with. So the first thing I want to do is actually create a basically quiz. So instead of quiz score 1, 2, and 3, I want to create a quiz scores column. So I'm going to say quiz or query interface dot quiz dot. I want to create a column. I believe it's just create column. Nope, it's called add column with the table, key, attribute, and the rest of it. Okay. So I'm going to say add column. So the table I want to add it to is the students table. And then the name of it, I want to call it quiz scores. And then I'm going to pass an object. And the object here is basically the type. So if I come back here to student, I can just copy because I know this is the data type that I want. And then I just use this Sequelize object right there instead of data types. And I could rename this to data types if I want to too. Okay, so I'm going to do say that dot then. So after we add the column, what I would like to do is basically transfer this data, so for these 3 columns, into that one column. So I'm going to say query interface. So of course we'll say X, and then this is the result of that. So we're chaining, right? So after this is created, we're doing dot then, and then query interface, and I can say query interface dot Sequelize, and then I can say query. So here is what I can basically run an arbitrary query on the, and I don't want to put a comma there. I can run an arbitrary query on the database. So what I want to run is basically an update function that takes these 3 scores, puts them into that array. So we're going to say update students, and we're going to be setting 3 columns, and we'll go ahead and make this a backtick. Using backtick, you can do a multi-line string in JavaScript. So update students, we're going to set the student or the quiz scores. So the first value of the array is going to be equal to quiz score 1, and we're going to 3 of those. We'll get rid of that. Okay. And that looks pretty good to me. So Sequelize.query, and we're going to update the students table. We're going to, for each row, what we're going to do is we're going to put the quiz score 1, 2, and 3 into quiz scores 0, 1, and 2. So that looks nice. So the last thing to do, and I normally won't do this, but this is kind of like a complete migration, is to kill these tables. But if I'm practicing and I'm not used to migrating yet, what I'll do is I will, and I would recommend for you guys as well, is to don't delete these columns yet. Delete the columns afterwards. You can fix the migration when you're done. But let's go ahead and run this migration and see if this column gets added and the data gets filled like we expect. So let's go ahead and select from students. We see these columns. Now let's go ahead and clear this, get our Sequelize query that we want to run. We want to do the db migrate, Sequelize db migrate, go ahead and run it. Okay, so unexpected token. Oh, it's just this little comma, I believe, right here. Oh, that's annoying. So my formatter is automatically adding that. Let's see if we can. And it doesn't like the comma, I believe, because I think everything else lines up. Yep, all my parentheses line up except for this guy. So what I can do is I'm going to just, so you guys can see, this is nicely formatted. How am I going to get the comma not to show up? Basically, I need Sequelize not to, or prettier not to run for a second. See, it'll auto format every single time. The only way I can think of it not to auto format is for me to do a regular string. So turn this into regular string, and if I turn that into the regular string, I'm going to have one long string. So let's bring that up here. There we go. And close it. Is it actually adding this comma in? It really is. Okay, so I'm gonna come over here and disable my plugin real quick. So prettier, disable, just for this workspace. I'm gonna reload, and then we should be able to, I'm gonna actually undo. Actually, it won't let me undo. Let's go ahead and drop this to a new line. Oops. So set quiz score 1, quiz score 2, score 3. I think this is just my ESLint complaining. Yep, just ESLint. Let's go ahead and run it. Should now get, okay, cool. So now I think we just get a regular error. So we did something wrong. Type undefined does not exist. So this is what an error looks like. I don't know why we're getting a type undefined. Update student set. Oh, I put a comma right there and a little single quote. That messed things up. So let's rerun that. This is what the error looks like. It'll tell you what's kind of wrong, and you can scroll down to the bottom to see what the SQL is that's messing it up. And also it didn't like, I think this was actually what was messing it up. Actually, the add column, not actually the, so let's run this again. We can see, actually it doesn't like the add column itself. Type undefined. So add column, I think what I'm doing wrong, let's see, we can click on it. Yeah, see, notice how I didn't put the type right there. That's what I was doing wrong. So I just copy and pasted this directly from students. Notice how I said the quiz scores, but since this is already a column, we put the name here. Also, this should be an S. That's a typo there too. This should be type. Oops. So type, give that a save, rerun, migrate, and cool. Quiz scores migrated successfully. Let's see what this looks like. Okay, so we can see here's quiz scores on the end. You can't really see it that well, so I'm going to just select quiz scores by itself from students. So we can see we successfully migrated over. So we see 89, 94, 72, and 13, 42, 16. And we notice how if you look here and match up, it all looks nice. So what we can go ahead and do is rerun this migration, and I'm going to say .then. So after we successfully create this query, I'm going to do one more. So .x, and we're going to do query interface one more time. And here we want to just delete a column. So let's see, there should be a remove column, and just give the table name. So remove column. The column we want to remove is from students, and we want to remove quiz score 1. And we want to do that 3 times, right? So like before, we want to create a little bit of an array. So, oops. So we're going to do this 3 times to delete each column. And I'm just going to say promise.all, pass in that array. There we go. And I think this is just ESLint warnings. Yep. So from our .then, we're calling promise.all, killing all these scores because we don't need them. So our final little cleanup. So now I'd like to rerun this migration, but usually what happens when I do this is it says you're all up to date, right? And the reason for that is I just ran this migration. Once you run a migration, you can't just spam run it. So what you do is you have 2 choices. You can create a new migration here and just like copy and paste what you want over there. But since I was really supposed to just run this migration like this the first time, what I usually do is I delete from Sequelize metadata, and that's where it stores where the migrations you have run. But since I just deleted that, we're actually gonna run 2 migrations. We're gonna run the quiz score here as well. So that's not good. I'm gonna go ahead and just like actually comment this out, so that way this doesn't run. So return that, and I'm gonna comment you out so you don't run. But it's gonna run both of these because I just deleted them. So this is not an ideal way to do it. You shouldn't really be deleting from Sequelize meta. You should just write your migration correctly like this beforehand, or create a totally new one. And so what I'm gonna do is I'm actually just going to also alter table students drop column quiz scores. That way we can just rerun the migration. So select all from students. So we notice our table, I basically just reset our table, right? I just drop the column, and I can come over here and see, hey, we're gonna create a new column here. We're gonna move the data over, then we're gonna remove these last 3 columns. So when we rerun this select statement, we should see 1 column here, all our scores stored in an array. Let's see if that happens. So go ahead and migrate down. Oh, I forgot to put a comma there. Rerun. And cool, looks like everything migrated. Come over here, select all. Awesome. We see quiz scores pop up, and of course this is a nice little transition. So as you can see, migrations are great for when you want to move your data over, change it the format of the way it's structured. We changed this from 3 columns to an array, and there's lots of other different things you can do with this. Take a look at query interface and you can see all your different options of things you can run. Also, this is a great way of basically doing version control on your database. Theoretically, if I did this properly, what I could do is I could basically populate this down statement to basically reconvert my data from an array back to 3 quiz scores, and then I could go back to how my database was previously. So it's like version control for your database. Personally, especially when I'm developing, I like to just go straight for the up. But definitely when you start getting up into production, you're going to start, creating the down in case you have to revert your database. So that's it for this video, guys. I'm going to go ahead and save this code, commit it, and push it up to GitHub so you can check it out if you want to see the migrations here. I'm going to go ahead and comment this back out again because it works fine. So thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.